All right, well, welcome to Agile Rhode Island. We're a small group, but happy to have people from all over joining now that we're in COVID times. So Agile Rhode Island was launched with the intent for nurturing the approach to Agile throughout Rhode Island, and as I said, wherever else online. Striving to foster growth both personally and professionally through collaboration and education. Tonight, we're lucky to have Stacy Ackerman present about what the hell is hybrid and how to navigate Agile marketing. Stacy will share with you the new Agile Marketing Navigator framework and why it's becoming the gold standard for Agile marketing transformation. As part of the meetup, there was definitely a full description of Stacy's background. I won't read it all verbatim to you, but she has a great background working with multiple companies, working directly with Mike Cohn, who's a guru in the field and co-founder of Scrum Alliance and Agile Alliance. She helped launch a global Agile community called Agile Mentors, and was on the leadership team for the revised Agile Marketing Manifesto in 2021. Most recently co-founding the Agile Marketing Navigator, which is a flexible framework for implementing Agile marketing. I'm sure we'll hear much more about that directly from her. And she's worked with clients ranging from Shipt with a T, Premier Health, Biotechny, and Sleep Number Corporation. So honored to welcome Stacy Ackerman to Agile Rhode Island.
All right, well, thanks everyone for having me here. It is a small group, so I would love this to be, really conversational. I will tell you everything, but feel free to ask questions in between. Give me your problems if they're relevant in this, and we can kind of talk through some of those. So just quick show of hands, is anyone working in Agile kind of outside of software? Either a larger transformation or you're dealing with something kind of non-traditional. Cameron, are you dealing with marketing or other?
I didn't even know that said Cameron. Sorry, it's Chris, but
Okay.
infrastructure, core infrastructure.
Okay, and
I will fix that.
No worries.
And for me, it's marketing.
Okay, good. Well, you may have a lot of questions then. So just to give you a little bit of background, I started my career in marketing and held a bunch of different roles in there. Some of those being director roles, public relations, event planning, kind of gamut of marketing roles back in the day when marketing was actually much simpler than it is today. And then I actually got into Agile really on the software development side, like probably most of you. And I had made a career change, and my husband worked in IT, and he said, you should go try this project management IT thing out. And after I did that for a little bit in traditional project management, I learned about this wonderful thing called Agile. I would say that was a decade ago, and I've been having that as my career ever since. And so my coaching really did start where probably most of you are within software. I've done some infrastructure teams. Worked with some marketing teams. I worked with some medical device teams. So kind of a little bit of a gamut. As I saw the evolution of Agile into more business agility, realizing that my background on more of the marketing side would come in handy. And I decided about 4 years ago to shift and really focus in on those areas. What has been interesting is I have a pretty good perspective on how to coach differently with marketers than software developers. So I'm hoping that is useful for some of you that might be needing to coach kind of outside of software. Because I will say it is a totally different animal when you kind of go outside of the realm of software. I'm going to tell you why. So we're going to talk about what the hell is hybrid. Let's navigate Agile marketing. I do apologize. Michael Seaton, the co-creator, was supposed to join us tonight, and he's actually a marketing professor and found out he had a class tonight. So it will be just me, but hopefully we'll give I'll give you kind of what you're looking here today. So have any of you been working in an Agile team as a Scrum Master, coach, product owner, where you're seeing a lot of chaos? Sue's like, yeah, a lot of chaos. That's the one word how I can describe Agile in marketing when I first stepped into it, sort of outside of software. It was chaos. I think it's chaos really because it's been around a lot longer in software development, right? Most people know, at least maybe they're not doing Agile well, but they kind of know the basics. They kind of know what Scrum is. They've heard of it. There's a common language. There's a history back there. But what's happening in marketing was really different when I stepped into it. And so they're much less mature in this area. And so we need to really kind of go back to some of the basics and break up the chaos. One of my best client stories, I'm joking when I say this, was a client that told me how they've been Agile for a year. And I found out they didn't even have a team. They didn't change anything except for bought an Agile tool. And that was their definition of Agile marketing. So we have a lot of work to do in this area. Quite a lot of work to do. So you're all probably familiar with Scrum and Kanban and Lean. The problem in marketing is that, first of all, they don't know what any of these things are. And all of the guidance and all the white papers out there and the literature and the experts have been saying, but just do a hybrid blend. None of these are going to work for you, so just kind of pick and choose. You can imagine what's happening when you're kind of leaving it in the hands of people that don't even know Agile to say, we'll figure out what works for you, right? And so it's really kind of a tough nut to crack. And I've always been a pretty, strong Scrum proponent, right? I learned Scrum years ago. I've applied it in software teams. I found it to be pretty effective. And I can tell you that when I tried to go do this kind of off the shelf within marketing, it wasn't well received. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with Scrum itself, but if the people on the other end are holding up their hands and being like, oh, no, hold on, this is for IT, this isn't for us, you have a bigger battle to fight, right? So it's not just trying to go in and implement Agile, it's trying to fight through the resistance that probably is already there with change anyways, right? We're all kind of see that as coaches and Scrum Masters, but really we need something for ourselves. So this whole hybrid thing has been really crazy. And so if you're all familiar with the State of Agile report, State of Agile marketing report comes out, and we're told that hybrid is the answer, right? And if you look at this quote, saying here is, we've been doing this for 5 years. We're rising these hybrid frameworks, but nobody knows what that is. And we're continuing with struggles with education, and the path has been a long and winding one. So what that is really saying to me is implementations are really sucking in marketing. And so I'm not seeing a lot of great adoption and a great amount of good Agile implementation. And no fault of marketers, but they're kind of lost. And so what's happening here is there's so many different languages going on, right? Here, this is Scrum, and this is Lean, and this is Kanban, and go ahead and try to learn all these different terms and mix them up and figure out what Agile means. And so that has been the decade in Agile marketing. So about 10 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, the first Agile marketing manifesto was written. And it was great at the time. But it got theory, and it got a very small group of people, of early adopters there, but it didn't really get very widespread. In 2021, as you mentioned in my bio, I was part of the revamp of that. We had a great community. We came together, we rewrote this Agile marketing manifesto. And I think it was a step forward. But the struggles that I kept hearing with my clients was, this is wonderful. What do we do now? Right? There's no way, because we're not going to adopt Scrum, and that's not for us. So how do we do it? And so there was just so much reinventing of the wheel happening, and so much translation. And Douglas mentioned that I've worked with Mike Cohn. You probably all know who that is, one of the pioneers in Scrum. And I co-trained with him in many CSM and CSPO classes. And we got a lot of marketers through there. But we have to do a lot of translation, right? Well, it means this in software, but it means this in marketing, right? How does, and so they didn't really feel always like this was for them, even though they knew they wanted to do Agile. Agile Marketing Manifesto, good, you got that. So a lot of things kind of led up to this failed adoption in marketing, right? Really seeing these failed adoptions in marketing. And so there has to be a better way forward, is my opinion. And so really IT hasn't nailed, and they didn't always have it nailed, right? Scrum was not always sort of the leading framework. Before Scrum, there was XP and there was a million more I can't think of right now late in the day, but there were a lot of them, right? And then the market kind of consolidated within software, and they sort of landed on Scrum as being what I would call the gold standard in software. And so at least they're speaking the same language and coming from a place of knowing what to do next beyond values and principles, beyond the Agile Manifesto. So these are some of the things that kind of led into this. I want to take a couple of minutes, and Douglas, would we be able to maybe do like 2 little breakout rooms? Is everyone okay doing a conversation and doing some interactive stuff here? What's your biggest challenge implementing Agile? I think there's a background noise, especially if you're doing it outside of IT. I'd love to hear from you all, kind of what challenges you're up against. And so why don't we just take the 5 minutes and do a couple of breakouts and come back as a larger group.
Yeah, so Barbara, I think you're the host. Can you split us into, create 2 groups and just split it?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, we've probably got about 14 total people, so yeah. And maybe somebody in each group can kind of pay attention and, track the highlights, or multiple people can, but to bring back if they want to share. Yep, okay, so you should be seeing a message that comes up to join a breakout room. It seems like people are disappearing, so that's a good thing.
All right. I think we all got like lost. Get back. But Angela, if I haven't answered some of your questions here, feel free to reach out to me after. And
Thank you.
I'm looking at the time like, oh, we gotta get going.
I know it's so much. It's so much. I want to ask you. I've taken a look at it, the tool beforehand, but I just wasn't sure how to basically incorporate it or use it in this instance.
All right, they're all back. I hope you had some good conversations among each other. I wanted to kind of build in a little networking. I'm looking at the time and realizing I'm gonna go just start to deep dive into the Navigator itself, because I think this ends at 7, right? Till 7.
7:30 is what
7:30.
we're going to say, 6 to 7:30, but there could be Q&A time, or
Okay.
sometimes we end up. Yeah.
I was looking like, oh my gosh, only 20 minutes. Okay, so we all have challenges, right? Whether we're in software, we're in marketing, and I don't have all of the answers by any means, but I knew there must be a better way to solve this outside of IT within marketing, because what I was witnessing time and time again was Scrum off the shelf wasn't working. Telling people to be hybrid and pick and choose for themselves what to do wasn't working. So I write a weekly column for MarTech and on Agile marketing. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna write a paper on this. I'm gonna write a new way. I had all these ideas in my head. And I could have done that in a few hours, but I realized that Agile is all about community. Adoption is all about community. It's not about me. It's not about Stacey Ackerman's idea, because I don't have all the ideas. I don't have all the perspectives, right? And so I knew I needed a team. And so I tapped into some of the clients that I was working with, some of the other Agile coaches that I've worked with that have worked in marketing, and some people that are just marketers that have an interest in Agile. So, and even Mike Cohn weighed in on this as well. So I had kind of a group that I put together about a year ago now. And we iterated on what started off as this article that I wrote over about 5 months. And we met and we pieced everything together. We looked at it from a social media person's perspective to a VP of marketing's perspective. And we pulled it apart and we picked it apart and we renamed things and we rejiggered it and we looked at what was happening today and what was missing. And so I will say my ability to be patient was tested, because I like to move fast. And so I was like, oh, I could have just done this myself. I could have written a book too and put it out there, and no one would read it except for a few people, and it wouldn't get adopted, right? Scrum only works because everyone knows it and does it. And so I wanted to have that similar approach with marketing, but even more so than Scrum, I really wanted it to be something that people weighed into. And so while the end product maybe wouldn't be exactly what I would do, I think it represented a lot of different kinds of marketing. The one thing you'll find with marketing is it's really different. You can have so many different kinds of marketing out there, campaign marketing and strategy marketing and PR, and it's just so widespread. So trying to fit something that accommodates everyone was really, really challenging. But I feel like we did it. We used teamwork, we used iterative work, we used the Agile values and principles and approach to get there. And we came up with what we call the Agile Marketing Navigator. And I'm actually really, really happy with how it came out. And we've kind of been battle testing it with clients in the last couple of months. We actually launched it in April of this year, so it's really, really new. And is it perfect? No. The one thing it is, though, is it's really pragmatic and flexible. So I think it does work for a lot of different kinds of organizations. And that's been kind of the biggest learning and takeaway we've seen. So we really broke it into kind of 4 components, and I'll go through these with you as well. But we really, it was built out this struggle to see implementation work. All right. We knew we needed something more. And so kind of the high level things that we pulled out of this is business goals to work and tying it all together. This is really important in marketing. So traditionally in marketing, I would say strategy is on one side of the house and execution's on the other. Kind of like in the old days with, software developers in the business being in two different camps. It's sort of strategy and execution was happening in silos. And so a lot of times the people delivering marketing have no idea what the business goals or outcomes were supposed to be. And so we knew that this was a huge gap that Scrum wasn't addressing, right? In and of itself, right? How are we going full circle through to tie what we're doing? Creative brainstorming, a huge piece of marketing. A lot of times what was happening is creative briefs would happen and they were very prescriptive. So they would say, we need this pixel and this exact, thing. And the team is like the McDonald's order syndrome, I call it, and they're just meant to execute marketing. And so I think that was a big miss that we weren't seeing in some of the Agile frameworks. Like this has to be built into the way that marketers work. If you've worked in Scrum for a while, one thing that probably pops up that I had seen pop up is, well, we don't know what we're doing because we're not on the Scrum team. And so people think only on the Scrum team needs to be Agile and no one else. And so we wanted to call out roles of stakeholders, roles of managers and other people, because we wanted to call out that Agile isn't just about execution. Agile is about a company change, a business agility change. And so that was a big difference. We offer suggested practices, but they're kind of a pick and choose. Because marketing can be so vastly different in the type of marketing that happens, and the maturity of a team, quite honestly, we offer up 6 practices, but we don't ever go and say, well, you're not, using the navigator correctly if you're not doing all 6. Because I know I've heard sometimes in Scrum, people can be kind of the Scrum police and be like, well, you're not doing Scrum. We didn't want it to be that way. We wanted to be like, hey, we're giving you 6 practices we think are really applicable within marketing. Do all of them, do none of them, combine them with some of the other things you're doing, it's okay. And so we needed to really have a very flexible approach. And the other thing was naming of what some of these things are. You'll find in the Navigator, there's a section that feels and sounds very much like Scrum, and it is, but we renamed some things because marketers like branding. We want it to feel like it's for them, that it resonates with them. Because if they're going to take this and own it, we wanted the language to speak to them. So those are the highlights. I'm just going to pause for questions, but then I'll kind of dive into it a little bit deeper. All right, well, no questions. I'll walk you through the high level pieces of it. I'm more than happy if you guys have an interest in trying this out yourself, to spend more time with you, to just set up a Calendly meeting with me. I'm more than happy to share more and to see how it might apply in your specific. This is what I would call like the biggest bang for our buck that we've seen with the framework. We're doing this, I can't name the client. It's a Fortune 10 client, huge client we're using this framework with right now. And it's a collaborative planning workshop. And it was sort of like built off the idea of like big room planning, if you've done that. But it's actually different. It's kind of a whole process, almost that upstream process that Scrum kind of takes it sort of at the backlog typically, and then you go from there. This upstream process is what connects those business goals down to the work. So within this collaborative planning workshop, we start with something called a guide point. And really all that is what is the team's North Star? What is it they're focusing on in the next quarter? Or if it's a campaign, what's the desired outcome of this campaign? What's the main thing this team should focus on? Because we want to align them more than just, here, send out a press release, right? It has to align to something higher. Now that guide point will probably tie directly to a larger business goal that the company has set. So, possibly beyond the team or beyond that span of the quarter, and they connect those together. All right, any questions so far? So the brainstorm thing is pretty self-explanatory. We do suggest that both stakeholders and the team come to this. This is a great time to align at the beginning of the quarter to say, let's all sit in one room. Let's hash this out. Let's not work in silos. Let's really understand where we're headed and how we may get there. Our minimally viable launch, if you've heard of MVP and product, it's the same thing. If it's a campaign, it's like, okay, what are the minimal campaign elements we need to test and learn from before we kind of go further, or we decide if this campaign is viable. So try to look at all the ideas and think about kind of that minimally viable. Blueprint is a roadmap, essentially. Like I said, I worked with a bunch of marketers on this. They had to name everything differently. But a blueprint is a roadmap. I have found in the client we're doing this with that they share it like every planning meeting. They share it with stakeholders regularly, like that elevation, so that we're not kind of tacking off the backlog and revisiting what's on there is super key. So this is a critical piece, and we have found it very, very effective in marketing.
Stacy, can you explain that a little bit more, the blueprint?
Yeah, it's right here.
Okay, perfect.
So it's essentially a roadmap, right? And you can see we put a guide point in here. So like I said, the guide point sort of what's that higher elevating goal for the team or what they're striving for. So in this example, if you can't read it, it says campaign targeting suggestive add-on purchases, moving the average cart checkout price to $50. So this was for an online shopping company. And so we're talking about really kind of a quantifiable guide point. They may not always be, but sometimes if they can be really specific with the team on the outcome, like this is what we're aiming for, right? We want this cart checkout price to increase. What are all the things we're going to do to get there? And then that's where we really involve everyone in ideation. After that whole workshop, we call it marketing owner instead of product owner. The marketing owner goes back, they put together this blueprint, they validate it with the team that what's feasible. And it essentially is, it's like, here's the big rocks we're going to cover, almost like epics, if you would, over the next quarter that the team will take on to accomplish this. So we're trying to connect all these dots together.
So just a quick question, Stacy, do marketers ever think in terms of like user stories? So thinking from the customer perspective, like as a customer, I want to see, a great offer so that I can save money, or is it kind of just?
It's in our framework. We call user stories customer stories. So that's one of the 6 practices. Like it's very weird when the clients I'm working with now, like their CMO's done Agile before and he really is opposed to them for whatever weird reason. But I also noticed them within the same organizations, they're calling user stories technical requirements. So I'm like, maybe there's some like strange misuse or of what that really means. And that can happen in organizations. But yeah, I find value in it. I think it's great for them to be customer centric in their thinking. So I definitely think it's worth it. And how I explain it is it's different from a user, and how they're using a system. So it's more of like, what's that customer experience like? I have struggled a little bit in teaching it the same way that I taught it to software people. So I'll kind of give you that nuance. The marketers tend to be like a really high level. So getting them to think in those like smaller chunks can be a little bit harder. When you start to say customer stories, they're thinking customer journey and they're thinking real broadly. So I was fighting that battle for a while. And I think instead of fighting that battle, it's okay to think broadly, but the execution tactic might change, right? So they might do the same customer story and one's a Facebook post and one's a LinkedIn post and one's a, whatever, right? So they just may repeat in different ways that way. That's how you could break them up. because trying to get them to think real small sometimes is hard in execution. Any other questions on this piece?
So you've got the calendar kind of laid out. I mean, my experience with marketing people is sometimes they get very focused on a date. Like, we're going to send that email on, August 15th. And so your software better be done, sort of thing. And so I've generally been on the software side, and it's sort of like up against that milestone, or,
Yeah, and I think that's
going out. Yeah.
That's a really good point. So they call it a content calendar, and marketing tends to always be on, right? They have to kind of come up usually with a monthly content calendar. So I think that's more tactical than this. I mean, these are kind of their higher level things a little bit. I do think there's nothing wrong with that content calendar, as long as they're not changing things if they get bad feedback from that content that was released. So if they are only date driven and they're actually not looking at results of their content and maybe tweaking messaging and things like that, it's pretty normal kind of practice to do. So yeah, I can see where software does have to align in that way, because they want to hit, typically, right, it's how many times you're reaching people, right? Good question though. And what we're seeing more and more is software developers on marketing teams. Right. So that it's not like, oh, we have to coordinate timing, right? Like, bring the software developer onto the team.
Yeah, that's interesting. So kind of, what we strive for often is that cross-functional team. You have everybody on the team who can do stuff, whether it's a tester or a coder or different types of coders. So in marketing, you're saying, like, bring that person on who can actually do it. Is that?
Yeah, I'm coaching marketing teams that have full stack developers on there. I mean, so yeah, they're coming. We're seeing that more and more, where they call it more of a more tech type team, because there's so much technology involved now with any, marketing so tied to the website, right? Everything is kind of interlaid. So yeah, it's becoming really closely wound, where traditionally you would have those very separate, and like you're saying, trying to coordinate across, it gets hard. So when marketers can bring actually like a tech developer or something onto their team, that's really good. We have a UX developer on one of the teams I'm coaching too. All right, so the second part is called the launch cycle. This looks and feels very much like Scrum, I'm not gonna lie. Slight nuances, slight tweaks, I'll try to point out what those are. A lot of it's just wording changes. So marketing backlog is a product backlog. Means the same thing, right? Cycle planning is essentially sprint planning. We do suggest 1 or 2 week cycles, not any longer in marketing, because they move too fast, right? So it's probably true in most software companies these days as well. But especially in marketing, there's nothing that like they can stick to a plan for more than 2 weeks. It's difficult. Bigger, slower companies tend to gravitate more on the 2 week side. Smaller companies, or depending on the kind of work they're doing, if they're doing social media or things that are launching multiple times a day, 1 week can be good. Daily huddle, we all know what that is. We're kind of emphasizing with the word huddle that it should feel like a huddle. It shouldn't feel like a status report. And the one that I would say is probably the most different from in software is what we're calling the team showcase. And that tends to be a lot of how are things performing in marketing. What kind of data and analytics are we seeing? What kind of results are we seeing? What kind of lift is this? How is this translating into sales? So that's the kind of thing that marketing stakeholders care about. They don't really care about I built XYZ, right? So it's a lot more business focused. that way. And then team improvement is essentially a retrospective. We emphasize team improvement because we really wanted to say, like, this is your opportunity to improve. And one thing we really pull out of here is choose one improvement item, you know, each cycle that you're going to own. I don't think that's anything different than Scrum really, but we're really kind of emphasizing that, like that single improvement item or one or maybe two things that they're going to take away from this. And then revisiting it in that next cycle too, to say, hey, did we move the needle? So any questions on this? Okay, here are the 6 practices. So Doug, you nailed the first one, customer stories. Story points. The interesting thing when you teach marketers about story points is they don't have estimation baggage. I find it so much easier, but they're not used to estimating work at all. And some will and some won't, right? It depends on, do they need to? And I wouldn't force this on teams, but sometimes it can be very helpful. It just depends on what outcome they're trying to get to. But I will say when I do a really simple story point scale, like let's just do 1, 2, 3, 5, right? It's almost like small, medium, large. And because they've never estimated, almost never, maybe t-shirt sizing in some places, but it's not common in marketing to estimate, that they get this really quickly. Also, marketing work tends to be a little bit more repeatable than software development, and we can bucket those types. So we can say landing page, okay, that's pretty much always the same type of work or about the same size. Or we can say a press release is about the same size. So it becomes less laborious than I've seen in software development teams where everything can be so intricately different. So that can be a really valuable practice I found to add. The work in progress limits comes from Kanban, if you're all familiar with that. This can be a huge lifesaver in Agile marketing teams. It's not something I start with. I would say a lot of these are not ones I start with brand new teams. Because like I said, they're so far behind where our software teams are that I think these things kind of come as they mature. I don't usually try to implement them immediately. But work in progress limits can be really helpful for teams that are never getting anything done or are just not focused. So that is one. Cycle time. This also coming from Kanban can be really huge. And we can, like I said, break it into work item types pretty easily. Client I'm working with right now, they pulled together software teams and multiple agencies. And we were kind of trying to look at their cycle time, and we know that there's a lot of overage in their process. So we facilitated a session last week where we looked at like, okay, what happens to get a landing page done start to finish? And even though we didn't fully get to measuring their cycle time yet, even setting it in front of the team so the marketers and the software developers start to understand each other's pieces was really, really valuable. And then to take it to that next level is really all about now how can we make this go faster? What waste is happening? And then that's waste removal as well, which comes from lean. It's like, what meetings are you going to that you don't need to go to? What are you doing because you've always done it that way? So I don't know if this is so much a practice as a way of thinking, right? And keeping that going. Now, if you've all heard of pair programming, it worked really well in software. Partnering in marketing kind of is based on that same notion, but it's not quite the same. Commonly see this with a writer and designer, right? So traditionally, they're going to do a firm handoff, right? We have to be all the way done with copy before we'll start design. And we're trying to say, can you partner? Can you understand? Like, can you kind of work a little bit in tandem and as a pair? And that can really help not only improve creativity, but just a lot of that back and forth that doesn't need to be so slow. Questions on this?
So I don't mean to ask all the questions, but
No worries.
since I do a lot of transformations and coaching, I'm used to diving in. So around like the waste removal, are you guys actively trying to do retros and bring up some ideas during that time, or is it just kind of an ongoing, practice?
I don't know that the framework addresses like every instance, right? I think you just need to be really pragmatic with who you're working with. And as a coach, if you're noticing, wow, they've got a lot of waste in their process, then coaching them on that, right? And through that cycle time, you can do that too. So when we started to lay out like how long does it take to complete a landing page and what are all the steps going into it, and when you realize that there's 32 handoffs and 10 people signing off on this thing, there's some waste to be removed there, right? And so empowering the team to recognize those things and help make change. Good question. Any others on this?
I think a slide back, you had something where it was like sharing. There it is, team showcase. I'm interested in that. And I am more software side, but it does make me think of times where we've, gotten a product to a client before we've really released it, but then we're having them do their user acceptance testing. They'll be like, oh, when you told me that button would look like an error if I made it red, but I told you make it red anyway. You were right. So I just love for you to maybe give us a story about how it works on your end.
Yeah. Well, that's good because I just did one today, so it's fresh in my mind. I do feel like it becomes a little like I'm seeing marketers be a little more polished and formal in this than I have with software teams. I don't know if that's good or bad. But it's really about business outcomes, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna go back and our guide point told us that we needed to, make X number of conversions. How are we doing against that? Okay, well, the team was doing search engine optimization. So they put together some data and analytics on how that's performing against that guide point that the team's striving for. So that, those kinds of conversations, and their stakeholders ask some tough questions. I mean, this is not just a dog and pony show. It's really we want results. What results are you giving us? Which is good. It turns the team around from like, look at what pretty thing we made to, is this driving real results? And so a lot of data and analytics, this team has an analytics person on it. So we're seeing that more and more in marketing, where an analytics person's embedded in the team as well, that can really unlock that data and they can make more data-driven decisions. Yeah, so that's kind of, it's less opiniony, at least this client, like I haven't had them all be this. But it's really more about, I don't care about everything that you did. I care about like what moved the needle, or what are some things we need to stop doing that absolutely aren't moving the needle. I had another client in their showcases. They had full dashboards enabled for everybody to have through transparency. I think they did it through Salesforce, some kind of Salesforce automation tool. And they were like, every single time, what are we not going to do anymore? Because marketing is all about testing and learning and like, what are we stopping because it's underperforming? So it becomes more along those lines.
Okay, so it'd be more like, okay, we ran social media ad, a Facebook ad, we did some A/B testing alongside it. We found this worked and that didn't work, but you're more talking in generic senses for the entire team, or do you mean this is just laser client focused for this one deliverable?
No, we're talking, the whole team is presenting just like they would in Scrum, right? Kind of sharing their work out. And so it is what the team did, but it's also what kind of performance analytics they're seeing against it as well. So it's kind of twofold. If that makes sense. So it's both maybe the work that they just did in the cycle, and then how some of the work's performed if they got results back.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. And that could vary a little bit depending on what kind of team you're talking about. Sometimes you have a content only team, right? Like they're not going to have a lot of that, right? If they're just content writers or something like that, then it becomes a little bit different. But if you do have a full cross-functional team that is trying to deliver end-to-end against a business goal, that's the idea anyways, that's what you're getting out of it. Good question. Let me go on to the roles, and I'll just sort of explain briefly how they're a little bit different. Obviously, we know what a team does. Same idea, right? They work together, cross-functional, ideally. Marketing owner is the product owner, and we're giving them their own special title so they don't feel like they're product managers anymore. And that word has kind of stuck even before our framework that we're seeing the word marketing owner. Scrum Master is Agile champion, and I've been a Scrum Master myself. Scrum Master, as you all know, is a really difficult role to explain to people. It's hard sometimes to fund it. It's especially hard to fund it in marketing. And so we've changed it a little bit to say, we want this role to be an Agile champion, kind of like the coach of the team. And that seems to get more buy-in than saying Scrum Master, because they don't understand what that means. They also often see Scrum Master as a project manager, which many of you probably see that translation happen. And they're like, no, we don't want a project manager. And so kind of rebranding it a little bit to almost be more of like an Agile coach. Sometimes we just say, maybe you've even identified somebody on your team that's just really into changing how they want to work, and they are the champion. They can help kind of take on this role as well, as long as it's somewhere, right? And so we found that has better adoption when we call it that. Supporting cast. So marketers rely heavily often on external agencies, and what do we do with them, right? They're a vital piece of the team, but maybe they're not the core team. Although sometimes, in some instances, their whole team is external vendors. We see that happening too. But maybe they're only relying on agencies occasionally. We wanted to explain what to do with that. And so we really are saying, bring them into the team when there's work on the team. That's the short answer, right? If this agency is working on a campaign for this next month, have them come to the huddles, have them participate actively, but maybe they're not there every day all the time. So we want to make sure that there was a place where we kind of explain how we work with these agencies. And we all know what stakeholders are. Scrum doesn't really say what they do or what their place is, and we're not really overly prescriptive about it, but we want to say like, hey, stakeholders, you are really a key piece in this Agile process, and your involvement is needed, your agility is needed, your looking at the world differently is needed. And then practice leads are essentially managers, right? They might run a graphic design team, a particular practice, they might run a copywriting team, a strategy team, whatever those people are. We're also trying to say, you're really valuable at making sure your people have the right skills, the right tools, but you're not really valuable in giving them work anymore. So, but we intentionally called out these other roles in this framework because we think they're important to address. So what is hybrid? We hope we've solved for this. We hope we've given them a hybrid. It is essentially a hybrid framework, the Agile Marketing Navigator, but we've kind of packaged it up and battle tested it with our clients and with other marketers and Agilists, and trying to make it easier to implement Agile marketing. And that's really the whole mission behind this, is if we can all kind of align on a framework that is flexible, it's not prescriptive at all. So there's a lot of room for interpreting this and blending it with things that organizations are already doing. but we think we're going to pave a better path. And so I would love your feedback. I'd love you to go check it out and provide your feedback. You can download a copy of this for free. You don't have to even give your name on the site, or you can just look at the site as well. So that's pretty exciting. And please connect with me if you want a deeper dive into this. I'm happy to just set up a call with you one-on-one and to go through your particular situation. And kind of giving you like a bonus thing, what Michael and I are up to. You'll see it says Navigate Agile here in the corner. We haven't actually officially launched our company. We're going to do that in the next week or two. But we've decided, instead of competing in the same space, we are formed a partnership, and we are formalizing an implementation program based on the Agile Marketing Navigator that's full on leadership coaching, training around the framework, and team coaching, et cetera. So it's kind of a whole kind of package if you want to go beyond the free stuff. So of course, the Navigator itself is free, but if you want like professional help, we are going to soon be offering that as soon as October 1 is kind of our launch for that. And then even more exciting, down the road, we are going to probably be starting like a licensing program for other Agile coaches if they want to take this program themselves back to their company. So that's kind of in the works in the next, we'll see how fast we go, but 6 months or so maybe. So I'll just open it up for questions. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
That was great.
Well, good. Well, I hope you learned something new. I feel like if I can take my experiences and save somebody else from having to reinvent the wheel, right? Let's just make it easier for all of us.
I have a quick question. That the supporting cast, and what was the last role? It was
Practice lead.
so. Is it the practice lead that supports the supporting cast?
No, practice leads are essentially the managers. And supporting cast is like ad agencies, other people that are like almost the dotted line to the team that would come in and help the team on an as needed basis. Sometimes those could be like SMEs, right, that you tap into. Kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, well, thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it. And if you're